Hello, political science class. This is going to be quite the experiment to see how well we can do video lectures and review the information that you would normally cover in class with me. Today what I want to cover is that very last little bit of Chapter 9, which is all about the interest groups. It was the very last section we had to cover before your next test on Unit 2, which opens officially today and is open for 1 week. Hopefully you have looked at all the announcements that I've posted and then looked at the course outline to see how we're finishing out the semester, looked at the change due dates. So please be sure that you do that so that I know you're up to speed. Now, what you need to do is print out that Chapter 9 handout, which is on Moodle, or look at it if you brought your notes home from class. I'm going to run through it very quickly the same way I would in class, and hopefully the sheet is pretty self-explanatory. As you know, I try to make them really detailed so that it makes for a good studying guide for you guys as well. Okay? And I really hope this finds you all safe and well. I did have to give away a lot of the Oreos that I normally would bring to class, and they went down to the main administration building, so we fed the office staff. So if you look at that handout on interest groups, you notice that it talks about something called K Street, and that literally is a street in Washington, D.C. A lot of them are numbered by letters of the alphabet, not a lot of creative thinking, clearly, but the vast majority of lobbying groups is on K Street. Quite a number of buildings not too far from what they call Ambassadors Row. And so if you say this is someone, oh, I work on K Street, they automatically know that you're a lobbyist. Now, if you look at your handout, it says the interest group universe on all levels of government, to top to very, very local, including your own local town, is affected by the interest groups that are in your area. The largest interest group in this country, for example, is the Chamber of Commerce, and virtually every town has one, and they are very influential in creating public policy, working with your local boards, mayors, whatever, to try to create the best business environment for all the local businesses that belong to it. So they're pretty powerful. The interest groups can be all different sizes, public, private, and they obviously can cover all different kinds of agendas. So it says then interest groups, also known as special interest groups, are groups that want to influence government policy by electing and supporting candidates who agree with them, and also encouraging those candidates to pass policies that will be advantageous for that special interest group, obviously, or funding certain parts of the government that will buy contracts and services from different special interest groups. So it can be pretty amazing. Now, when a person is hired by a special interest group and they go out and talk to legislators, they are called a lobbyist. And they're called a lobbyist because in the halls of Congress, they cannot go on the House or the Senate floor. So as a result, they can follow the person down the hallway in the lobby, but they have to stop at the door. So they're called lobbyists for that very reason. And what you do as a verb is you are doing lobbying, trying to persuade those people to vote the way that you want. So a lobbyist is the person who's hired to represent the lobby. And some of these lobbyists are so good and so persuasive, or have been around for so long and know so many people, that they literally may represent 2 or 3 or more different groups. So it's not like if I represent the restaurant industry, I just do that. It might be that I represent several different groups or several different unions, simply because of the talent and because of the connections I've made and the fact that I can get in the door and see somebody when someone else can't. So a lot of this is about power and influence, and back in the day it was also about money, because before there were tighter regulations, the reality is that you could essentially buy favors and give presents and have parties and give them basketball tickets or take them on trips overseas, and things like that still happen, they think, but you have to account for everything that you're given in terms of from a specific group. But every so often you'll find some legislators who are caught taking theater tickets, taking basketball tickets, whatever the case may be. And so they really have clamped down on that, because not every group has the money or the resources to be able to have that kind of influence. Now, there's different types of organizational structures you'll see on your sheet, many, many types. Some are very disciplined and organized, like the AARP or the National Rifle Association, although they have kind of fallen on hard times a little bit. Some are very organized, some are what we call grassroots, some are spontaneous. They literally spring up because of an activity or an issue that suddenly is on the horizon. And so it's really kind of interesting. Now, some are called centralized groups or confederations, and these are very organized. They have a headquarters, established staff and leaders, and confederations are interest groups made up of several independent local organizations that provide funding and hold power. So a centralized one would be like the NRA. When Mothers Against Drunk Driving first started, they were state by state, a very loose association and confederation, and then eventually they became much more organized and centralized so that they could coordinate activity across all 50 states and subsequently get legislation passed on the federal level. So they eventually kind of matured into having more power, although they started very much on a local level of some mothers who got together who had lost children in accidents with drunk drivers and wanted to see the loss changed. We also have what are called mass associations or peak associations. Mass groups have large membership and pay dues like AARP. Peak groups are businesses and other organizations rather than a group of like-minded individuals. So this might be more people who are involved with environmental causes, for example. The Sierra Club is a very well-organized one, but you'll often find smaller peripheral ones in different states as well as in different local places. Now, when you belong to a special interest group, there's membership benefits and incentives that I've listed, and most people join these groups because they want to. It's to their benefit, whether it be a cause that they're in favor of, maybe they're wanting to change rules to favor their business or industry, but usually they belong because they want to. They want to be engaged with it. And you have different types of benefits that I've outlined on the sheet for you. And so there's called solidarity benefits, where members feel good that they're supporting a cause or an issue with others who feel the same way. So it provides a sense of belonging and support. So that could be like the Sierra Club again, or Mothers Against Drunk Driving. There's purposes benefits, where you feel good about working towards a goal, even if it's not accomplished. You work with others who also care about that specific issue. And certainly the early days of Mothers Against Drunk Driving was very much a purpose organization. And then there's coercion. And coercion, like we've heard the term before, is where you have to join a group, like a union shop. You pay dues whether you want to or not when you join that job because you benefit from the negotiations that they've done. Now this part, the coercion ones, have really been fought a lot in the courts. Many people have challenged that, saying, well, I don't see why I have to pay these union dues. I'm not a member of the union, I don't care. Well, the problem is that union made the effort and got you that good pay, salary, benefits, whatever it may be. So you're a free rider. You're taking advantage of what somebody else has paid for and done that you get to take credit for. Now, over the past few years, we've had a relatively more conservative minded court in terms of the majority, and many of them are more pro-business. So some of the decisions that have been coming out of the Supreme Court over the last 5 years, for example, have actually supported the idea that no, you don't have to pay in some of these cases for the union dues, although you get the benefits of the unions. So unions have gone down in power and in popularity partially because you don't have this closed shop, is what they call it. If it's an open shop, it means you can decide whether or not you want to join. And then there are selective incentives, and that's where you get benefits that the group provides. So here, AAA is a really good example of where you join it, and not only do they do the towing and come get you when you're stuck, but you can take trips, again, someday when that happens, when the virus is over. You get benefits and discounts in hotels and restaurants and whatever, or insurance, life insurance, health insurance, car insurance. And so those are things that kind of add on to, wow, you get to take advantage of this great rate because you belong to this group. And so AAA does that, and AARP does the same thing. And with the AARP, even though it's the American Association for Retired Persons, the neat part about that is that they let you join at 50, and the incentive there is that because you're looking down the road to retirement, and their job is to watch out for policies that will protect retired people. They want you invested, say 15 to 20 years before you retire, so that you are paying in, so you're a paying member, but you get to take advantage of the benefits that they provide as well. And AARP has some of the best co-insurance plans, for example, for seniors on Medicare. Medicare pays for Part A, hospitalization. You pay in for the coverage for Part B, which covers part of your medical bill, like going to the doctor's office, but you still have a big copay. And so you carry a separate additional insurance if you can, and AARP is really famous for doing that and providing a good plan with reasonable rates for people. Then you've got resources, and this can vary greatly depending on the membership, the money, and the organization. The more resources, the easier it may be to achieve their goal, but it's not guaranteed. You don't always get what you want, especially when you have people in government changing policy depending on a crisis or an emergency, for example, like we're going through right now. Or it could be just that you don't have very large numbers, and so people are not as invested in, worrying about what it is that you want. On page 2, if you look at the top of page 2, it says staff. Usually staff are divided into two parts. There's the group that's at the centralized location, and they are the grunt staff. They do the hard work day to day and often have the most connections to government and policymakers and following budgets and things like that. And so they have a lot of influence and friendships with the legislatures and also with researchers, department members, public and private groups. So that's going to be one group who really work really hard. And so with that grunt group who's in the central office, as it were, whether it be federal, state, or local level, they do what's called the business of lobbying, and that's on your sheet. So if you're talking about these people who are involved in day-to-day lobbying efforts, it's very heavily regulated. They have to file paperwork with the government. They must report staff who spend more than 20% of their job lobbying, the monies that they spent and where they spent it and how they got it. And this is literally a billion-dollar industry because government is so spread out all over the country on so many different levels. And over in your book around page 260, it talks about how Lockheed Martin Corporation has one of the largest number of lobbyists, for example, and there's way, way more lobbyists in Washington, D.C. than there are even congressmen and senators. Now, some of these lobbying groups work through their membership in a trade association, so the restaurant organization or a beer group organization. And so trades and associations, the plumbers, whatever it may be, they have somebody actively working for them. Now, you also have interest group strategies, have inside and outside strategies on your paper. And you'll see that inside strategies are usually what's happening in Washington, D.C. And there is a list there that includes direct lobbying. And that's when they go to the offices of the legislators and talk to them directly, or button them. It's when you go after them in the hallway and try to button them down, and when you follow them. There's even a room off the lobby where they can meet the representatives and the senators. They literally want to catch their ear and give them data, statistics, and sometimes these lobbyists are so influential that they are in these guys' offices helping to write legislation that ultimately favors them. And in this great big bill that was just passed to try to help the average worker, the biggest issue in Washington was that so many lobbyists were pushing so hard that their business be one of the ones that's rescued in this last package because of the virus, that it really was bogging things down, and that crazy stuff they said was just put in there willy-nilly. And sometimes, this last bill was over 600 pages long and they had 2 days to read it. But packed in there, depending on who the legislator was, might be something that it has an advantage for their area. And it gets through, and it's one of those pork barrel things that we've talked about before. So number 2, they drafting legislation regulations. They often sit in the room and help write the rules to their advantage, and we as taxpayers often don't know that or notice that or catch that, but we are vulnerable to it. They also provide research. Now, sometimes it's very good research and it's decent. Other times it's very, very bad. And so it's up to the legislators to check out those resources, but we know they don't always do that. So that is a big concern. They also often testify before Congress at hearings and in litigation and court cases. obviously trying to persuade people to their point of view. If you look at the tobacco industry for many years, when they lied about the true effects of cigarettes, they were in court constantly defending the fact that cigarettes weren't going to hurt you, they weren't bad. And it took many, many years and a lot of whistleblowers to blow the top off the fact that we had been lied to and poisoned by the tobacco industry. And of course, hopefully they work together. They try to be helpful and friendly. They don't want to have what they call an adversarial or difficult relationship. And sometimes they'll even join with other lobbying groups together as a team so that they can have more punch in terms of what they're trying to push through. And again, that gives them more power. Now, those are inside strategies, where they're inside DC or their state house or your local mayor's office. Now, you also have what's called outside strategies, and that usually applies more to outside Washington, D.C. or outside a state capital. And this is where you have grassroots lobbying, where people rely on members to participate through letters, petitions, protests, and it's called a grassroots strategy or a bottom-up strategy. And sometimes people pay attention to that because they realize there's so many unhappy voters that they've got to do something if they want to be reelected. So that's part of it. Then you've got AstroTurf lobbying, and this is considered very sneaky. And this is where a group will send out a form letter, and you get it at your home, you sign it, you mail it in as if it's your letter. And so you didn't really take the time, the energy, or the purpose to write that new letter to that congressman, but because they record the mail that comes into that congressman's office, it looks like you care about it. And so they go by numbers, not necessarily who wrote the letter. So it looks like bottom up when really it's the organization figuring it out, and it's a top-down effort. So we have to watch for that. And then there's mobilizing public opinion, getting the word out so more people understand and know about the issue, and they hope to draw attention to their efforts and have more folks join up. And that's what Mothers Against Driving did a real good job on that. And then on the last page, you see electioneering, and this is where an interest group gets involved with an election by making contributions for money or in-kind services. And in-kind means that you don't have the money, but you go and volunteer 5 hours, and they count that as if you paid money in terms of what your value and worth is. So if I donate 5 hours and they say, well, normally we'd pay somebody $10 an hour to do this work, well, they write it down as a $50 in-kind contribution. And lots of times when you're applying for a grant or even looking for a loan, they look at how many people volunteer what would have been paid time, so it shows the sincerity of the effort. So that can be a very good thing. You've got political action committees, and also known as super PACs. And again, they take in super amounts of money and not often have as much accountability. And they raise money for campaigns and ads, but their amounts are limited. And over around page 270, depending on the edition of your book, they talk about PACs and the limits. So those are there. And I think I gave a chart about that out in class right before we left. That also includes 527 organizations or 501c4. Those are on your list, and again, these are tax-exempt groups that can influence an election with ads, but they cannot name the candidate in the ad. They can just simply provide information that tilts you towards one side or the other, so they're pretty obvious. And those guys have no contribution limits or spending caps, so that part's kind of dangerous. And we've talked about that once before, so it should look like a review to you. Then you have cultivating media contacts. You want a sympathetic media, so you work them or perhaps trick them, or they may trick you. Media coverage can be free publicity. Now, Amy Klobuchar, for example, didn't have a lot of money for her campaign. And so she did talk show after talk show after talk show because it provided her with a lot of free media coverage. And so that really helped her in terms of getting her name out during the campaign. Mr. Trump did this when he was first running because he was a celebrity. And so a lot of stations covered his speeches and his rallies way more so than any other person who was trying to run on the Democratic side, and even after Mrs. Clinton was picked, because he was kind of sensational. It was kind of a hoot to see what he was doing. But that, again, all in dollars and cents, was lots and lots of free publicity. Then your chapter starts to wind down, and it talks about how much power do interest groups have. And that is always a question in terms of who they are, where they're located, how much money they have, how many contacts do they have, how many people do they represent, how serious is the issue. Today on NPR, they had a wonderful article about the Restaurant Association and how hard they have fought having sick time for restaurant workers. Some of the biggest chains like Darden have provided very, very little in the way of sick time. And now, because of the virus, they are now offering some sick time to their employees. And so sometimes it takes a crisis before they start doing the right thing. Over 50% of employers in North Carolina do not provide sick time. So people go to work sick, and of course in this time, going to work sick and possibly passing the virus to somebody else is very dangerous and life-threatening. So some industries are stepping up, giving sick time for the first time ever, and that's a good thing if you're one of their employees. The question is, will they continue those benefits once this all peters out in a year or two? We'll see what happens. But obviously, if you can help get somebody elected, you're going to feel like they owe you and that they should be doing nice things for you and helping with legislation. So there may be a feeling of some payback that can happen, especially when some of these groups are very, very large and very, very influential. And you may be this little person or this little group, and you may feel like you can never get to the table to even be part of the discussion. And heaven help you if you're part of a minority group of some kind, whether it be a financial minority group, a gender minority group, religious minority group, whatever it may be. You may not get the same time and attention as the larger group. So we know that that's always a dynamic that's there. Then, level of conflict. Does that interest group have opposition? Sometimes a group can have people who are so opposed to it that that's what knocks them out of the box in terms of getting any consideration. For many, many years, the NRA, since the late 1950s, early 60s, has been extremely popular. But in the last few years, there's been a lot of abuses by the people who are running the NRA in terms of managing their money, wasting their money. People are mad that their dues are being spent on expensive clothes, houses, travel. And so some people are very angry that they're not living up to the mission of the NRA. And so they don't have as much funding as they did before, and they don't carry the same threat in terms of saying, we're going to be against your campaign. The NRA never took a stand on who they would want you to vote for. They would take a stand saying who you should vote against. And so if people aren't paying as much attention because their own membership is mad at them, they're not quite as powerful, especially after all the school shootings in the last few years. Many people in the public have said, well, wait a minute, you guys maybe have gone too far, and maybe we should have background checks, maybe we should have something that addresses automatic weapons again, like we did under the Brady Bill. And so people change, times change, attitudes change, and again, it all depends on what's happening in the environment around us. So sometimes groups can actually be in trouble if they have a lot of people opposed to them. And then the last part is about how groups succeed. It's all in the eyes of the interest group. Big changes are hard to do, but small incremental changes are usually the best on state, local, and federal levels. And then bigger and noisier may not always be better. Sometimes you don't want a lot of attention because people might start criticizing whatever it is you want to do. So very often you are very strategic. You know your opposition to get funding and act together, and you probably will succeed. So that is a little summary of Chapter 9, the interest group. Okay, and so hopefully you'll look that over, plus the other part of chapter or unit 2. The test is posted. It opened today. It's open for a week, and then tomorrow I'm probably going to start posting the video that has to do with Congress. So you want to make sure that you print that out so that you can follow along. And if you have any questions at all, you know my virtual office hour right now is every day from 9 to 10. Now that may change depending on people's use and when they seem to be more available. Some teachers are only doing it 3 days a week, like 2 days for like an hour and a half, and then an evening one for people. You know that if you email me that I'll get back to you probably the same day. And then if we need to connect, I can always set up a separate Zoom meeting just for you and I to figure out something. Now make sure you do look at the assignments that are coming up, the biography, and there are a lot of free books resources. If you just Google free library books, it'll come up. There's a number of choices. And also you can call the LRC, the Learning Resource Center at the college, or go online in Moodle. You'll see a link to the LRC, and they can tell you about free books that are available for you as well. So you don't have to go looking for something fancy, although you may want to get an ebook off Amazon. They're usually pretty inexpensive, and they have a very large free ebook library. at Audible as well. So check that out and see how you're doing with that. So that's it for today. Hopefully this all took, otherwise I will have to do it again. But I really miss seeing you in class. And again, I've given away all your cookies. I even had Easter candy, in my office, stacking it up, getting ready for Easter time. But my most sincere thought is that you're all safe and well, following the CDC guidelines, practicing social distancing, washing, wiping, swiping, cleaning, and using that social distancing during this very difficult time. Other generations before us lived through famines and pestilence and certainly wars. I'm going to post a couple of things about the 1917 pandemic for you to read, and you can write up about it as extra credit. It's really important to remember that there have been crises throughout all of mankind, and sadly for your generation, this is probably going to be the biggest one. The group right before you had 9/11 and terrorism to live through. And so everybody's got something, and it's how we respond as human beings and support and help each other. So I hope you're looking out for your family, for your friends, look out for your neighbors, make sure that they, especially the older ones, have someone to, assist them. Look out for the people in your community who are near you who are doing healthcare. We have neighbors who are nurses at the hospital, so we took over a giant package of toilet paper and paper towels and said, here, you don't have the time to shop and you need these supplies, and that's one small way that you can thank people for what they're doing. So anyway, please do your best, take care of yourself. Please read the announcements that I've sent. It has additional information. And also, again, if you're feeling overwhelmed in your coursework, and this is just going to be really hard because this does affect everybody differently and every family is affected very differently. If you feel that you cannot finish this course or another course, by all means think about dropping it, but it has to be before April 3rd, which I think is Friday, so you've got to let your instructor know. The college is waiting to hear, and I don't know what's going to happen, but they're waiting to hear that if a student drops the course right now because of the COVID-19 and has to take it over, that they may not be charged for that course when they take it over. So it's not a guarantee, but I know that's something they're working on to try to help a lot of students in this very difficult time. Also remember that registration for summer and fall is starting today. So get in touch with your advisee so that you can get the courses you want. I don't know if we're going to offer as many this coming summer and fall. Most of the summer will be on the internet. The second half might have some seated classes with small numbers, social distancing, but again, it's all up in the air. The reality is that the virus won't hit our area probably for a good 4 to 5 weeks because we're farther out in rural, which in a way protects us, but it also delays what might happen. So please stay aware, please take care of yourself, and really pay attention to what's happening on the government level, both federal, state, and local, in terms of how they are or are not working together. This is an unbelievable learning laboratory right now in terms of the government's response and how we're doing as citizens and what we expect of our elected leaders. So pay attention to that. Please take good care of yourself, and I'll be in touch soon. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.